started. My name is Nina Schaefer. I'm with Boise Bicycle Project. And my co-presenter with me is Eric Willardson.
Yeah, and I'm with the Idaho chapter of the Sierra Club.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Basically, I want to give a quick overview of what this presentation will be about and who we are and the coalition that we work with. In this presentation, we're going to be giving just a quick background of canal pathways in the Treasure Valley and elsewhere, why we believe this is an important initiative for Boise and the greater Treasure Valley area, and ways that you guys can get involved. The Canals Connect Community Coalition is a volunteer-based coalition of a bunch of advocates like Eric and I that are represented by the organizations that you can see below. We started about 1 or 2 years ago, mostly as a conversation of how we can get things like this going, and has kind of formed into a stronger coalition with the support of the city with their recent budget approval of the Urban Pathway Master Plan. So that's just a quick synopsis of the coalition that we are on. And first, we're going to start off with 2 personal stories of why this project really means a lot to us. And I'm going to kick it off to Eric to start his off.
Cool. Thanks, Nina. And I moved to Boise about, it's been like 9 years now. And my first job here, I was a paraprofessional at Garfield Elementary on Broadway Avenue. And I didn't have a car. And I lived in West Boise, northwestish Boise. So I used to ride on the Greenbelt for about 5 miles and then get off the Greenbelt around Taco Bell Arena. I don't think it was called that then, but around the BSU arenas, and felt like loved the first 5 miles. It's a great way to start the day and end the day. The last mile to Garfield was always kind of like scattered how I would get there. I knew Broadway would get me there the fastest, but didn't feel safe biking on Broadway, and just went a different way. It felt like almost every day to do that final mile. And there was one day that I was running behind and was biking on Broadway and got hit by a car. It was pretty like low impact, but it still like scared me enough to start taking the bus, which presented its own like range of difficulty, but in a good way, but it was just like a change of pace. And I think when I started this project, or started looking at canals as potential pathways, when I worked at the Land Trust of the Treasure Valley and heard a lot about this idea that like these right-of-ways could be used. I looked at this map to see where I had been hit, and it had been close to where the Idaho Pizza Company is. And lo and behold, the map shows that there's some sort of lateral or drain that could have been used to provide a chance to get off the Greenbelt, but still have a pathway to get over to Garfield Elementary School. Most of that pathway, I think it's called the Bub Canal, has been tiled, so it's like underground now and isn't really an active opportunity for a pathway, but it still would have been cool to kind of have that available had it been an opportunity.
Yeah, and I initiated this pointer so we can continue using that in the presentation so y'all can see exactly where we're talking about. And we have a similar story at BBP of this area where we serve a lot of kids in Garfield Elementary, and a couple years ago, some of the kids were biking to Boise Bicycle Project shop that's in the Lusk district from Garfield. And when they came in, they said that they experienced a lot of near misses and just felt very scared on Boise Avenue. So Jimmy, our executive director, looked at the map and was like, okay, what other routes can we give these kiddos to get to BBP safely? And nothing was really popping out besides this trace of water that you can see here, which is the Reidenbach Canal. And that's when Jimmy kind of had an aha moment of, if they were able to ride along the Reidenbach Canal, which is fairly close to Garfield, they could spend most of their trip going to BBP away from the roads and on a pathway, very similar to what we see in the Greenbelt. So that was kind of the initial start of BBP, really looking into how can we utilize these canal pathways similarly to how we utilize the Boise River. So that's our connection to this project, and we're going to get started with talking about it a little bit more. This question I have is, what does an integrated valley-wide bike and pedestrian path system look like? I wanted to ask some folks. We're both very popcorn style presenters, so we're gonna ask you guys questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and tell us what your thoughts are. I don't see the chat. Eric might be able to. Yeah, Eric can see the chat, so Eric can monitor the chat. But my question is for y'all is, what is your favorite open space in your neighborhood, and just describe what it's like and why you like it so much. And again, you can take yourself off mute and share openly like that if you want to.
From Linda Paul, Manitou Park.
Manitou Park is a great one, and it's right along the Reitenbach, if I remember correctly. Any others?
Terry Day Park.
Terry Day Park is awesome.
Yep.
I actually just moved into the bench area and experienced that park for the first time ever, and I love it.
Cottonwood Park by Eagle and McMillan Road.
Awesome.
And Gary. Alexandra was the one who said Terry Day Park.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, and Linda said she'd love to be involved in this effort, or at least
Awesome.
she
Thanks,
would.
Linda. So what we're hearing with a lot of these favorite open spaces is parks. Some may have some trails that might be their favorite, and a big favorite of mine, of course, is the Greenbelt and all the access and nature that one provides. But we're really hearing these close to your neighborhood parks as kind of the similarities between all of them. So what we are proposing with Canal Pathways is a Treasure Valley wide off-road bike or walk path system. And we want to use this infrastructure that's already in the Treasure Valley as a way to connect to other places. This kind of infrastructure that's been around probably longer than most of our roads that we drive, and that we base a lot of our activity centers, neighborhoods, and parks on. One question you might be asking yourself is, or question or concern is, what about drownings along canals, or potential pollution issues within canals? And these are all similar questions that the city and advocates experienced when creating the Greenbelt. And something to note is that the Greenbelt was, or the river before the Greenbelt came around, was really dangerous, and the Greenbelt has helped provide eyes on the pathway for the river, as well as decrease pollution from industries, because people were using and loving the Greenbelt pathway. One thing I noted was the term eyes on the path. Eyes on the path is kind of our own version of what's called eyes on the street, where a very densely populated urban area has people hanging out in their apartments or businesses looking out onto the street, and acts almost as a second security system for the street. So if something were to happen, they could help jump in or help solve an issue or problem that's happening on the street. And we could see those kind of things happening on the pathways like we do with the Greenbelt. Eric, on to you.
Yeah, cool. And so when I think this initial conversation happened between a couple of different groups and individuals, including Jimmy and Nina and myself, a couple other folks who have moved on from working on local NGOs. We kind of came up with this baseline vision for connectivity for an urban pathway system or a canal pathway system. And you can go to the next slide, And there are three components of it. One is within a mile of our homes. So everyone within the Treasure Valley could have a pathway that would be interconnected with a lot of different services, from recreation to transportation to community assets, within 1 mile of their home. And they'd have a safe way to do that, to get to that pathway system. So like the low stress bike network that the Boise Bicycle Boulevard Coalition put together and had ACHD adopt could be like a great way to intermix with this system and get to it. And some really great examples of this are starting to pop up. DeMeyer Park in Southeast Boise has a trail along the Zinger Lateral. There's a picture of that later on in the presentation. The Kasha Bikeway is going to utilize a bridge that goes over a canal and has uses a pathway through Kasha Park, but then it's also using an on-street low-stress network to traverse an east-west corridor on the bench, link in with I think 3 or 4 schools along that line. So there's a lot of interconnectedness going on, but also safe places to recreate off-road. You can go to the next slide. It's close to other mixed-use path, like I already mentioned. An example of this, if all these different, there's 1,500 miles of path or of canals and laterals and drainages. I mean, I think it'd be cool to have a pathway along all 1,500 miles, but I don't think that's really plausible or necessary. But all these different laterals and drains and canals, they go in and out of the Boise River, which means that they're naturally linking into the Boise River Greenbelt. And this can provide a greenbelt, provide a connection to the greenbelt, provide a central like thoroughfare for transportation, active transportation options, and provide safe connections for neighborhoods that aren't connected or don't have pathways already. There's also opportunities like the Farmers Union Canal could connect different foothills reserves in a way that isn't possible up in Northwest Boise as well. So there's lots of different options. And then economic connectivity. And what we mean by this is that generally pedestrian heavy areas in the Treasure Valley and across the country and world tend to have really resilient economies along them. Some really great kind of like examples of this in the Treasure Valley is along Indian Creek Square and Pathway out in Caldwell. The Garden City Greenbelt has seen a lot of like economic vitality. I know there's some issues that pop up with gentrification that would need to be sorted through as well. But generally places that are easy to walk and bike have a more resilient economy through recessions and economic downturns like we're seeing now. And on top of this too, this vision is really providing access for all, regardless of someone's socioeconomic status. There's plenty of research out there that I'm not going to dive into because I'm not a public health expert like some other people are, but there's plenty of research out there that shows that people having access to outdoor recreation facilities generally have better health, as well as environmental health issues. If you have safe ways to reduce car congestion and traffic, you have an opportunity to mitigate air pollution and alleviate some environmental health issues that other folks are dealing with in different parts of the valley. So. Yeah, and we're advocating not just for a path, like a few pathways here or there, but for integrated pathway systems that expand over an entire municipal area. Just want to show a couple of examples really quick. This is kind of like the original irrigation pathway system that was created in the Phoenix area. It's a little bit over 60 to 70 miles right now. And it's not just in Phoenix, it traverses the entirety of that municipal area, which is one of the largest in the country. And this has been a long-term effort. I think one thing that's a little different about the Phoenix system as opposed to here in Boise or some other systems is that this was something that was actually initiated by the irrigation districts or irrigation system down there to have pathways to help mitigate some of the issues they were having with people trespassing and using the roads anyways. and it's continuing to grow. It's an ongoing process. So there's this vision, just like there was for the Greenbelt, like we're advocating for, but it's not complete. And, progress is a process. It's not a destination. Um, yeah. I will share one story talking to one irrigation district employee who asked to remain nameless as if I was going to share this comment out. But one thing he said, he got to go down to Phoenix for like a conference for irrigation district managers and talked about one thing he thought was like really cool about this pathway system was just the fact that there's interpretive signs along it that kind of it described the history of irrigation districts to the area. I think he felt like here in the Treasure Valley that history is lost. We wouldn't be living in this like booming municipal metropolis if it hadn't been for irrigation districts providing these water delivery systems across the Treasure Valley. And he said that would be like one benefit that irrigation districts could see from having pathway systems, that they're not just seen as like bad guys who are stopping something from happening. It's like it's a part of the history, and it continues to be a part of the history of the region. We have a short video that kind of highlights what this looks like.
I don't know why the sound isn't working, at least on my end. Sorry about that all.
I will find the link for that. So if you want to watch it with the sound after the presentation or even during the presentation, you can do so.
Awesome. I think even without the sound, it shows all the potential.
One thing I want to mention is you might have noticed that there are people rowing in the canals. That's not something we're advocating for. We're not advocating to be able to use the water, even if folks have gone water skiing in them before growing up. But we're already starting to see this come to fruition, this vision a little bit across the valley. I think one thing, when I worked for the Land Trust for 3 years here in Boise, this idea of like using these right of ways always came up with like volunteer projects and other people who were engaged with us partners. And it was always clouded kind of in this kind of like cloud of impossibility. Like there's just no way, the barriers are too big. And even talking to some city leaders, not just here, but in other places in the Treasure Valley, that seemed to be a very like common strand of thought. While all that was going on over the last couple of decades, Nampa and Meridian have really kind of like just buckled down on establishing pathway systems along canals. And so they've created these master plans over the last decade or so after doing a few pilot projects, had a lot of success. Meridian has 20 plus miles of pathways along irrigation infrastructure, and Nampa has, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's like 10 to 15 miles, and they have master plans to connect with one another. Meridian is planning actually like 133 miles of pathways eventually. And all those, the Meridian map, those red lines are ones that are already in existence. And some of them, like Settlers Canal, can link up with Southwest Boise and Garden City, potentially on the south side of Chinden, and connect down into like Julia Davis Park. That would be like super cool, I think. Obviously, there's lots of hurdles, and I think the story of like canal pathway system is very similar to what it could be for, or it was for the Greenbelt. It's issues with dealing with private property, with easements that other entities own. Um, but I think a really great example here in Boise, if you want to go look at it, is in East Boise near Warm Springs Park and underneath Table Rock. The city of Boise established, I think it's just under 2 miles of the Greenbelt along the old Penitentiary Canal. So this idea of like pathways along canals has existed in Boise, and it existed as a solution to get the Greenbelt done, where having it go along the river seemed like too big of a challenge.
So how does a pathway system in the Treasure Valley strengthen our neighborhoods, which is why a lot of us are here at this conference today? With the models that Eric has shown, we see a lot of incredible potential. And again, I'm going to do a big community question is, what potential do you see with canal pathways here in the Treasure Valley and in your neighborhood? And Eric, I'll have you monitor the chat again. If nothing's, oh wait, it looks like someone just responded.
Oh, can you share the question again?
Oh, yes. What potential do you see with canal pathways in the Treasure Valley or in your neighborhood?
Linda wrote, it'd be a great way to recognize different neighborhoods as you walk and pedal through each neighborhood. There could be identifying signs, etc.
I think I totally agree, Linda, and I think that kind of goes into a little bit more of what we'll be talking about in a couple slides.
Opportunities to close bike ped infrastructure. Alexandra mentioned that. Opportunities for folks to walk, play, bike, connectivity. Gypsy is a homeowner next to a canal and is asking if you'd have to give up some land or have your garage, which is 10 feet from the existing path, moved. Which are all good questions. Linda mentioned too, would bring neighborhoods together.
Yeah. With the question regarding garages, that will eventually be answered probably within the urban pathway master plan that the city is conducting. And like Eric said, it's not something we are looking at on every single canal, but really looking at how the canal pathways could potentially help with the networks that we already have, including on the roads and in bus systems.
And one thing I want to mention too, just because I think it's important, is there's no threat of eminent domain being used for this to be established. The legislature decided in 2015 that eminent domain can't be used for pathways or like non-motorized trails and pathways. So this would be a process in which like municipalities would be working with you as a property owner, and you get the chance to decide if it's best for you or not to allow it to happen. Gary asked about ACHD requirements with crossings where canals go under roads. I have been told they'd have to be ADA compliant if it's a formal pathway.
All right, we'll get to the next slide because I also have a question with this one. But in this slide, you can see two examples of canal, using canal areas. So this first one is in CW Mark Park, it's downtown. That waterway there is actually, I can't remember the name of the canal, but it's a canal that flows all through downtown Boise. And that's the water that we're able to display in that park. So that's an example of if it's not a pathway, what else it can be. And CCDC is also looking at opening, daylighting some more of that canal in that area. And that second example I took this past weekend, I live along Reidenbach Canal, and this is one of those pathways that technically isn't a pathway, and we probably were breaking the law when we were on that pathway, but so many of the canals that we have in our area are already highly used by their neighbors. So a lot of what we're advocating for is making it so it's no longer trespassing if you are on those pathways. So I do have one more question, and it's a bit more pertinent to what we're facing today. And that is, during the pandemic, did you find yourself walking or biking more in your neighborhood? And how did that impact your mental health and stress levels during, let's say, specifically with the shutdown when everything was closed? And I'll start it off while you guys are answering and Eric's pulling them up. I found myself walking a lot more and trying to explore new areas of my old neighborhood that I used to live in. And it was the one thing that we felt really comfortable with doing, and participated in the bear in the window scavenger hunt. So we really enjoyed being able to take those walks and bike rides to help our stress levels.
Alexandra wrote, spent more time biking. It was fun, but also challenging figuring out the best bike routes on the bench. Francis Fuji wrote, yes, pathways have been a godsend. Linda Paul wrote she actually avoided the Greenbelt because I feared it would be too crowded. And I heard that from other people too during that time.
Yeah. And I think, so Eric touched on this a little bit, but studies have shown that your neighborhood environment really impacts your own mental health and stress, specifically in areas where you may lack recreational facilities and have a higher vehicular congestion in your area. And that's something Canalways within the Treasure Valley can tackle, both providing more recreation in neighborhoods that might not have direct access to the Greenbelt or the foothills, and also helping people drive less often if they choose to do so and use canal pathways as their mode of travel. Here is another map, and in this one, I wanted to highlight with this little pointer, there's two different canals kind of going in this screenshot. And I wanted to highlight this area because we see that it's next to two high schools, a bunch of neighborhoods, and a pretty big economic center being the Boise Town Square Mall. If someone wanted to bike there, say from the bench, like Alexandria and I, we would maybe have to take Franklin or Emerald. And if we don't feel very comfortable on those roads, they're not that helpful. I know firsthand that Franklin does not have a sidewalk along this part. So it's all dirt trail with a lot of goat heads. And if these two pathways, or if these two canals had pathways along them, it would provide better connectivity to schools, to economic centers where jobs may be, and as a recreational facility for those in those surrounding neighborhoods to enjoy. I'm going to be throwing out some statistics in this slide and a couple other. A study done by the Housing and Urban Development found that the average cost of owning a vehicle annually comes out to $8,750. That's about $730 a month. And if you're lucky, that might be the amount that you rent. So really, with that number, we can see how important it is to have other options than driving, especially if you're on the lower income side, because cars can be so incredibly costly. And then another study that I want to touch on with this slide is one that was done nationally, hosted by the Portland State University, about bicycle commuting. And they found 60% of their participants were interested but concerned, mostly because they didn't have a lot of really safe bicycle infrastructure in their area. So providing pathways along canals such as these ones would help alleviate concern for safety and get a lot more people on the road. Nationally, it would be get 60% more people off of the road and onto their bicycles. And while we're not here saying that everyone must get out of their car and start walking and biking, we do recognize that we have to provide more options than just the car. And right now, there's not a whole lot of that, especially if you get outside of the downtown and southeast end of Boise. And that brings me to the topic of induced demand. This means basically when you're dealing with the road and it gets congested, a lot of people say, well, let's add another lane and that'll help with congestion. But in 3 to 5 years, we'll likely see that lane fill up just as much. And we need to recognize that we can't provide one solution to congestion, but we have to provide multiple solutions. And if we can provide those alternative transportation options through canal pathways, then it will get less people off the road. And if we keep on widening the roads until there's nothing else, then people will still keep driving, and we just need to have more options to help with congestion, traffic, and pollution. What would the story of canal systems be in the Treasure Valley? Eric, I think, did you want to take this one on?
Yeah, I can take this on. So really, like we said, we have these great models from all over the country, not just out west, but in other places in the country too. But we also have like great pilot projects here in the Treasure Valley. We know that Meridian is working on a really robust master plan just for their city, within their city limits. And really what this is about is figuring out how to connect all these different disparate pathways that have popped up, like the Zinger lateral in Southwest Boise, and part of the Caldwell Greenbelt is going along Indian Creek. But Indian Creek is piped like a canal there and is managed by an irrigation company. This is a foothill ditch out in kind of central Eagle area that has a pathway along it. This is really about creating vibrancy in your neighborhoods, especially ones that don't have access to the Greenbelt and foothills and other public space. It's an opportunity for micro parks. In a big way, this can also help tie it into public transit options, and then already existing plans like the low stress bike network. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to go to the next slide.
This is a really, I think, beautifully done comprehensive map of all sorts of irrigation ditches and canals and creeks that we have in the Treasure Valley with those cities highlighted. Eric touched on this before, but we have over 1,000 miles of infrastructure surrounding our canals already. And it would be great if we can get that infrastructure that's already in place and start utilizing them for canal pathways that connect all these cities together, both recreationally and for commuting reasons. And this one, I have my last question for you all is, what other sorts of connections do you see with canal pathways? And an example that I was looking at this morning was getting this Farmers Union lateral can connect into Eagle and up through Emmett and to Star, and the potential that can have for recreation and road cycling, especially since it does mostly parallel Hill Road. So that's one example of other ways that they could connect all of us together. Does anyone else have any ideas of what sort of connectivity between other cities or community centers that the canal pathways may have? Let's see. And while we're getting those answers in, I'm gonna actually stop sharing my screen. This is the end of our presentation. And I think we just wanted to open it up for a discussion and Q&A from here until about 2:45. And now I can see the chat, so I can help you out, Eric.
Okay.
So it looks like someone asked, is there any sort of connection with the canals to Micron? That's a great question. And technically, no. There is that greenbelt that goes along Federal Way. I do believe they have some underground access to the Reidenbach and the New York Canal for their own water use. But that's not to say that we could use the Reidenbach and New York to get individuals to Federal Way to then be able to bike to Micron. I think that's a really great point and one of those really great economic agencies that could benefit from pathways along canals. And Renee, go on.
You go.
Okay. Well, Renee mentions the canal on the bench near Garden City, and I believe you are thinking about the Settlers Canal, and the city does have plans to create a linear park, and that's actually one that Meridian has developed on their side. So if we were able to develop a pathway along that canal, we would have a bikeway that would take us to Meridian, which would be awesome.
There was a question earlier from Alethea about figuring out who manages the area. It really depends. Like, it's like a big depends issue. I think the best advice I can give you all as neighborhood association leaders is to research who the property owners are first, as well as who the irrigation district is that manages the canal. Where we've seen progress be able to happen in Boise is like along Settlers. Another example is like near Hyatt Hidden Lakes. There's a sidewalk now that's like where the right of way used to be for Settlers Canal up there. Parks and Rec owned the property and was able to make that happen. I'm going to share my screen really quickly because this is something that I'm the secretary for Veterans Park Neighborhood Association, and we figured out like this is Willow Lane Park, and this like green sliver on the east side is actually along the Farmers Union Canal. That's owned by Boise Parks and Rec. So knowing who the property owners are can be helpful, especially if it's like a public entity. And that's one way you can help out right now, I think. And then knowing who your irrigation districts are. Most irrigation districts or canal unions actually have to, they have a whole public input process. They have board of directors. It's worth going. The board of director meetings are supposedly public. I haven't looked into this too much, just knowing that they exist and that there's public input meetings. But it's worth like just calling them up and asking them, and asking questions is worth it, I think. Especially if you're coming from a place of like just being curious and wanting to build relationships. It's not, irrigation districts aren't like bad guys in this. Like they have, their interest is in delivering water to water users, and that is what they're budgeted for, and they're not budgeted for pathways. But knowing that they're public entities that have elections, and knowing that is important, I think, in getting involved with your community resources.
Yeah, and Eric, I'll jump in on that. The Nampa Meridian Irrigation District is having an election this year. It's a very tricky one to navigate in that you have to be a homeowner and your land has to have had either water rights previously or active water rights. So not everyone is technically qualified to vote in it. And you have to be within the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District zone, and you can find that all on their website. For those who are really interested in pushing for canal pathways, there are 2 candidates running. There's Donald Barksdale and Graham Patterson. Eric and I are both from nonprofits that are 501c3, so we can't tell you right now who you should vote for, but you can research those folks, call them, get their information from the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District, see if they have Facebook pages, and kind of determine for yourself who might be the one that best fits your interests. So if you're a homeowner and if you have water rights or think you might have, you can always call them to get more information on the election. You can request an absentee ballot by this Friday at 5 p.m. or vote on election day, or now until election day. It's not going to be on your ballot. You have to go elsewhere to make that vote. And that is all information that you can find on their website. And we'll add a link to that website for you guys. And then actually Francis asked about the timeline in the Boise plan and what are the stages to make it happen. The city planners did do a presentation during a work session to city council on the plan. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're looking basically at about a year and a half to create the urban pathway master plan. And that right now we're in the phase of them looking to get a consultant to help us create that master plan, and then there'll be a citizen stakeholder group that can help get involved with that. So right now we're still kind of in that pre-planning phase, and then probably around February, I think that is when we'll start seeing who's going to be running that master plan and what their intentions are and how to get involved on the city's end of things.
Yep. And Cindy put the link to the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District in the chat. I'm also going to put a link in it's just a Google Excel sheet or spreadsheet. If you want to be added, I know myself and Nina both send out kind of like updates on what's going on. So if you want to be added to that email list, just to be kind of kept up to date, and then we can also follow up with you if you want to have any further conversations after this presentation. Mm-hmm. Also want to make a plug. We're starting to work on a kind of like a business sign-on letter of support. So if you're interested in helping out with that, either as a business owner or just as someone who's a volunteer and wants to help further this along, please let us know. And that's, I think a big part of this is the Denver also has like 110 mile plus pathway system. Some of it uses the creeks that run through the municipal area, and some of it uses the canals and irrigation infrastructure. They were in a similar place 30 to 40 years ago. And what helped kind of push that process along was just showing that there's public support. This isn't about like pressuring anyone or labeling someone a bad guy. It's just showing that, like, kind of collecting the support that exists in the community and showing that it's there in a way that hasn't been done before. And we're kind of taking our cue from them and their success. So if you want to help out with a business sign-on letter, that's kind of like the next step to help show that support.
I was catching up on the chat, and I see that Gary had the question and comment on the increased traffic levels on the Greenbelt and whether or not that could be alleviated by canal pathways. And I think the answer is 100% yes. One thing that we kind of touched on is just the lack of access that some neighborhoods may have to recreational facilities. And with so many canals that go through so many neighborhoods, it would essentially be a creation of a green belt within their backyard. So I do think it would help spread all those interested in recreating on the green belt elsewhere, as well as provide opportunities for those on the green belt to explore new places that they may not live nearby. And again, if you all have questions or comments, this is just basically a very casual Q&A portion of it. Cindy asks, do we have a link for the full canal map? We had 2 that were shown up on the presentation. I think, I don't know if we have a link to an internet website for those, but we can provide the files for those as well. And maybe Eric might have a link for them.
Yeah, I'm keeping notes, and we'll put together a little like email to folks following up with this stuff.
And Linda asks, have we had contact yet with canal companies in the Valley? And if so, what have the responses been? Yes, we have. We tried to attend some of the board meetings like Eric mentioned, and the city does work with the canal districts that to either help with like new development, creating pathways. And I would say that the response has been pretty neutral, and they just do bring up the issues of like ongoing maintenance that might come up for the canal districts. or whether or not the canal then should be tiled, which basically means putting it underground. So there's an ongoing discussion with them, and it's mostly just working out those issues that are legitimate that we just have to work through as partners together.
And I've talked to a couple managers for one canal company in Caldwell and a couple of other bigger ones that span a few cities. And I'd say that's been my take too, has been like, not against it. Also, this is going to be difficult. Also, we need to make sure it doesn't interrupt our operations. So it is really a collaborative, has to be collaborative moving forward. So, and then there's always a concern about safety, which we're concerned about too. I think there's proven techniques to mitigate any potential safety issues that may come up.
And regarding those photos, I did just share a photos guide for the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District that kind of helps you figure out whether you can vote and when to vote, where to vote. I'll add photos of those canal maps, so then you at least might be able to screenshot it from there.
And thanks everyone for attending today too. And even if you don't do anything else, the best thing you could honestly do is just to make sure, help us change that narrative that this isn't possible, because it really is. And there's proven examples of it here in the Treasure Valley.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess this can be the last call for questions. We do have time slotted until 2:45. But if there's no other questions, that's totally okay. But like I said, this will be the last call for any questions or comments that you may have. Yeah, Cindy makes the comments that new subdivisions are somewhat easy. And that's where Meridian and Nampa really got lucky, is that they recognized the potential and they were able to create easements as development was coming in to have pathways along those subdivisions. That's the extra challenge that Boise has, but like Eric said, it's not impossible, and we just have to keep pushing for it. Alexandra asks, do we have cost estimates for building out a complete network? We don't. Again, I think that's something that'll come with the urban pathway master plan that the city will be working on. It's a hard one to even estimate now because not all pathways will be treated the same. Maybe one will be perfect for a paved kind of pathway that the Greenbelt has, or maybe one will be fine keeping as a dirt pathway that's more of like a walking path, a bit more recreational. So there'll have to be a determination of what canal path will have what in terms of infrastructure, and then the cost will come from there. But something to consider with cost is, like the Greenbelt, it's gonna cost us money to make us do this, but when looking at that induced demand and getting less people driving, it will be long-term savings for cities and taxpayers and agencies that have to worry about road maintenance and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of I guess cost benefit analysis there could be, both short-term and long-term, for canal pathways. Ooh, look at all these questions. Yeah, Gary brings up the point of some canals going under existing roadways, and that then would enter ACHD's right of way. Eric, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just when I had like an initial meeting about this with ACHT staff, they had just mentioned that any formal pathway when it crosses a road and doesn't have, some other like an underpass or overpass, it has to be ADA compliant and have like pedestrian crossings. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't know how else ACHT would be involved. I know Meridian is working on their first like overpass at an intersection for a canal pathway. And ACHT also, like, they had purchased some property along State Street for like some of the road widening projects they did recently, near like 36 and Collister. And they actually like own some property, and that's why the Cash Up Bikeway is going forward. And they left an easement along another property along Farmers Union Canal. So yeah, ACHT definitely has a crucial role to play, especially where the pathways are intersecting with roads.
Mm-hmm. Gypsy asks, how would we find out how close it would come to our property lines or land that would be needed to be relinquished? There are maps, I believe, that the city has that are GIS that you can see exactly where those property lines are. It's pretty interesting when you really start digging into that, because sometimes you'll notice that the canal property lines might go into your living room. So I believe you can get in touch with the city for some of those GIS maps. Eric might have a better link to that. But that would be how you would kind of figure that out. And you can always even just call the city and have them look for you and save you the time.
Yeah. And the county too has a GIS program that shows property boundaries as well.
Yeah, Gary, ACHD will definitely be involved with a lot of these. The lucky thing is we are seeing pretty general support from ACHD for these pathways. I know Bruce Wong has come out and he's their director, and he said that he's interested in it. And it's kind of, I don't want to say no brainer, but because of the savings that they would have from maintenance and whatnot, then it would be pretty smart for ACHD to sign in on that. And we do have current commissioners and potential commissioners with this election year that have shown support for canal pathways. So we'll see what comes up with this election, but we feel pretty positive that ACHD will be a fantastic partner on this. All right. Any last questions or thoughts, either from Eric or any of the other participants? Thank you again for all of you who've tuned in. It's great to hear that y'all have learned some stuff, and hopefully you'll join us for the ride. Oh, you know what? That actually reminds me. In the Hoova app, I was playing around with it. I did create a potential meetup. If you're interested in hosting a COVID safe social ride within your neighborhood and your neighborhood association to explore what sort of potential canal pathways you may have, there is a meetup that I set up, and you can RSVP to that and then email me to see when we can make that happen. But I think that would be a really great initiative to help get your neighbors and neighborhood leaders interested and as participants for this initiative. So check out that. Otherwise, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So thank you all for attending, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.